The coronavirus is the biggest threat this country has faced for decades. From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home. I urge you, at this moment of national emergency, to stay at home, protect our NHS, and save lives.
We've already got people that are homeless and households in temporary accommodation. Already had a number of homeless cases that needed to find alternative accommodation. But then when the pandemic hit, it was unprecedented that people were losing their homes through different circumstances. We had families that wanted people to leave because they felt that they were at risk when other people were living with them. So the lodgers were asking us to leave. We've got domestic abuse started to rise, and we've got those households coming in needing accommodation. We'd got landlords, some illegal evictions because landlords couldn't evict people from the tenancies, so there were some illegal evictions. There was all sorts of different homeless scenarios coming through that needed temporary accommodation. But we already had people in temporary accommodation, so we needed to move people out. There was no house, the housing register had been suspended, so people couldn't bid on properties on the Homes for Bolton advertised on the register. All hotel accommodation closed down. There was no movement through any of the refuges or any other types of supported accommodation. So we needed to look at different ways of moving people into accommodation to free up temporary accommodation that was needed for other people that were being made homeless.
Just prior to lockdown, obviously there was a lot of speculation and a lot of perceptions flying around about a lot of the unknowns. One thing that we did know at that time was that the temporary accommodation in Bolton was at a high level in terms of clients living there. One of my concerns that I raised with my director, Gemma Palby, at the time, when we had a conversation around the potential impacts of the coronavirus, was that we didn't know that the full story around the contagion, and that if somebody was to contract coronavirus whilst in temporary accommodation, it could potentially wipe out that unit, impacting on lots of individuals and families. So very quickly off the back of that discussion, we agreed to formulate a plan, a process in order to support direct allocations to those in temporary accommodation in Bolton, and to support that further we would provide initially a 6 months tenancy agreement for all clients that we look to sign up. Off the back of that, I made contact with John Powell at the local authority to have quick discussion around how that might look and feel, and actually is it kind of doable? Absolutely was the response.
A phone call from Craig at Bolton at Home, and we've got saying that we've got these properties that that were ready to let, because they were ready before we went into the pandemic. So how could we have a process of moving people from temporary accommodation into this accommodation quickly and safely? And so we produced a process together and identified families. We looked at all the people that we had, all our households in temporary accommodation, and then looked at the properties. The list was sent over by Bolton at Home, what properties were available, and we then started to look at matching up the households to the properties.
We had removals companies that had previously sent staff home, that had got a volunteer team to help support us with removals of furniture. The furniture packages are predominantly put together by the local authority. Some of those were stored at our Riverside depot, But again, all of the logistics, all of everything that was needed to coordinate that person moving from temporary accommodation to a new accommodation, but with all the restrictions of COVID, was something completely new and different for all of us. We had to change how we worked, traditionally, a very much paper-based way of working. That changed practically overnight to a digital solution. That was very much sort of ad hoc and learning as we go. But we had everything in place that by early May, we made our first direct allocation. So following lockdown end of March, within a 5-week period, we had a list of properties, because at that time we weren't able to proceed with any allocations. We weren't able to advertise any properties because Homes for Bolton needed to shut down. So we had a number of properties that were ready to let, good to go, that we couldn't do anything with. So it kind of makes sense that we use these to allow vulnerable people to be moved out of temporary accommodation.
The phone rings and it's Craig, and he lets us know that we are going to do our part and we are going to help some of the most vulnerable people in society move into their own independent accommodation at possibly the worst time known to this generation at least. We kind of said, let's do this. My team, a long history of supporting some of the most vulnerable people out there. This is what we do. But we were going to do it with our hands tied behind our back. We were going to do it from our living rooms, from our kitchens, and we were going to do our best.
So we need accommodation for family accommodation, for families with children, and for accommodation for single people. And some of those also needed support going into accommodation. They'd also need furniture, because all the shops were closed, all furniture and appliance shops were closed, so we needed to make sure if people were moving into accommodation, they had all the essentials that were needed: beds and white goods, cookers, fridge, freezers.
It was difficult. We were not unused to supporting people move in a crisis. We weren't, this is what we do, but what became clear very quickly was that this was going to be different. Our usual suppliers were closed. The normal people that you'd pick up the phone to were not answering, and we effectively had to come up with new ways of working in that time.
One of the actual strengths from this was we were able to rely on the existing partnership working with a lot of organisations, and it really felt as though everybody was pulling together to get what we needed to be done.
All of the situation around accommodating people out of accommodation into their own independent accommodation, certainly through the pandemic, created huge churn, to say the least. That's a small way of describing chaos. But we had the privilege of being involved in the humanitarian response, as well as being involved in supporting some of the folks that came through Bolton at Home's doors, and that was absolutely a tremendous outcome if you think about it, because some of those folks are stable in accommodation and something they've not been for forever for some of them. So that's a marvellous outcome, say nothing more. But we had the privilege, as I say, around this humanitarian response, and to say that we had to jump into a new game would be an understatement. We were used to feeding maybe 200 or 300 people a week. We moved to feeding around about 1,000 people a day. And the partnerships that existed then were there, the relationships were there, but now we needed to engage those relationships on a whole new level. And so we had to start delivering food. Nobody could collect food. So we moved from 20 or so volunteers to just short of 1,000 volunteers who were delivering food in their cars to people's houses. And the large part of that were people who were accommodated through Bolton at Home, and certainly into this the new services, but also residents who've been there for many years who were just stuck behind their doors. And we got food, we think now, roughly to about 70,000 people, and a huge proportion of those were as a result of Bolton at Home getting involved and delivering that food. So not only were there great outcomes for people in accommodation, but we got great outcomes in terms of just connecting people who were disconnected, stuck behind their doors, saw nobody, had nobody to talk to because they weren't allowed to come out because they were shielding, and a great opportunity to knock on their door, take a step back and say, hi, how you doing? And you know what, we're in your corner. And out of that, I think we have probably prevented huge issues around people being isolated forever, maybe in their heads. So brilliant piece of work, and really brilliant that people are still going on, still maintaining it and still living independently, maybe with a little bit of support, but then we all need a bit of support, don't we?
People got what it is we were trying to do. So a number of staff chose to remain at Valley House to make sure we could deliver on this, and that permeated throughout other services and teams because people got behind what it was we were intending to do. And so the response from everybody within Bolton at Home, and a big shout out to our colleagues in technical services as well, for making sure that those properties were absolutely ready for people to move into without any issues. It was just so pleasing to be able to almost sit back and watch this happen like clockwork. And the benefits of it were clear to see. From May to December, we accommodated 135 people from temporary accommodation, families and individuals. Over 90% of those individuals and families are still Bolton at Home customers now. A number of those customers are now receiving some level of support, whether it's just through a phone call, just as a check-in, or whether it's something a little bit more intensive. And it makes me wonder what might have happened had that not been put into place. Bolton became the hotspot of COVID within the UK for a period of time. And on reflection now, I do wonder where we would have been had those people living in the temporary accommodation hadn't had an opportunity to access more secure accommodation and permanent accommodation. Because had there been a breakout within the units, again, that would have put pressure on the NHS, other services. In addition to the accommodation that we provided to temporary accommodation, unfortunately, we also saw a rise in domestic abuse. During the pandemic, we did over 70 allocations to people needing to flee their homes in an emergency. Included in that were some hospital discharge accommodations that we dealt with, management moves and management lets to avoid serious antisocial behaviour. So how the services within Bolton at Home and our partners responded to the COVID crisis was absolutely tremendous.
Approximately 18 months ago, at the start of the first lockdown, I was depressed. Marriage was broken, abusive and unhappy. I felt that lockdown and its restrictions was a life I had lived before. I needed to flee with the children from our family home. Advised but homeless welfare that the only place available for me was at hostel in Preston. My family and friends were in Bolton, but fearing that I would be found by my ex, I knew I had to take the hostel place. I was contacted by Bolton at Home offering me a house. I was overwhelmed and surprised. Within days, I was helped with moving into my home. Everything from counselling and all my essentials in my new home, our beds, toaster, microwave, fridge. Everything I needed from having nothing was provided for me and my children. The safest place I'd felt in a long time. The Tenancy Sustainment team, amazing, supported me through my darkest times, and every time they were just a phone call away. Food vouchers have been provided from Bolton at Home to make sure I never struggled. And now I feel that I have found myself again, providing for my children, working full time. I love our house that Bolton at Home helped me to make my home, and I will forever be grateful. The experience I had with Craig and the team was like no other. I've never met such amazing people. It feels like a community, and they do this every day.
For the vast majority of people that we supported to move on, some of those people settled in really well, and we've been able to kind of wave them goodbye, and they are living their lives Some of those people need more help and support, and that's what we do. You know, time moves on. My guys are out there in the community, and you know, fantastic that you know, some of the relationships born out over many months that in recent months my team have been able to get out there, go and visit these people in their own homes, and you know, see some of the results of the work that we did back then.
I have been with my ex-partner for 13 years. My children and I have suffered physical, emotional, financial and psychological abuse for over 12 years. It did not feel good. It was like we were not living and just existing. It was his way or no way. The day I left was because of the mood he was in. When he came home and how he reacted towards me and my eldest. We kept it from him that my youngest had an Instagram account. He called us names, and then the things he was saying and started headbutting things, it became physical and really uncontrollable. My friends rang around various places for me. She knew who to phone as she had experienced this before. Housing Options gave me emergency accommodation. I then had an IDVA to support me because I was referred into the Merrick. However, I even made contact with Bolton at Home's Home Finder team to let them know I was fleeing domestic abuse and I wanted to take my name off the tenancy, as the tenancy I left with my partner was a joint tenancy. I was then contacted by Bolton at Home's domestic abuse officer, who gave me advice on my current tenancy and supported me to move on from my temporary accommodation. It all happened very quickly, and I was lucky to have this support. The transition from one accommodation to the other has been so smooth. I have been kept informed and been supported with essential items for my property as I fled mine and my children's homes with nothing. I had no belongings. It was amazing how quickly this was all done. My domestic abuse officer gave me lots of support, both emotionally and practically. This is still ongoing today. It was very crucial that I got the support I did from the Housing Options and from Bolton at Home team. It meant the world, and we all received the support we needed. My domestic abuse officer supported me to move into a Bolton at Home property within a couple of days, and the children are so much happier. They have been through a lot through the past weeks, and we are now a family settling into a new home and a new routine. We are safe.
I've always been proud of the work that we do, not just with the Home Finder service in terms of allocations, but as an organisation, what we do within our communities, but also with our partners and alongside our partners. What we did as a partnership, as services, as individuals throughout the pandemic last year, and the impact that it had on our communities, I could never be more proud of.